I'm not used to that. Well, welcome everybody. I guess for those watching live, this is the September meeting of the B-1 Zoning District Working Committee. We have a full agenda this evening to try and get through some things, basically everything we've been working on. And we added the committee mission statement to the agenda this month, just as a reminder of where we started, where we're headed. I guess while I'm rambling, I will add that at the last planning board meeting, I gave a little bit of an update on where we are. Suggested we might need some direction from the board.
There we go.
And we had a little bit of a conversation, and we didn't really come to any conclusions, but we did get a nice thank you from the chairman of the planning board, which I'd like to extend to this committee for the effort that's being put forth and the research that's been put behind these studies. They noted, several members of the board noted that we seem to have gone further than anyone has gone with this effort in the past. So it was noted, it was appreciated, and I said thank you on behalf of the committee. So thank you to all of you. So that being said, I did mention we have quite an agenda to get through tonight. Our goal for the meeting tonight was to try and come to some agreement on what our potential zoning recommendations or the changes to the zoning might be for the planning board, as that is our ultimate goal, is to make some recommendations to the planning board. And you know, we've started the 40R conversation. We have started the sewer report, and then we have a number of what we've been calling warrant items that we could get through tonight. I think we should just get started, see how it goes, and then we can decide how we want to close. You know, as it's a committee, I don't know if we need to officially vote on everything. Rich or Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we can just come to some general agreement, put together some outlines, and we'll take some sort of a recommendation to the planning board and see where we go from there.
Hey, Aaron.
Yes.
We had our first advisory meeting last week, and I told them that we were not going to present at the fall town meeting. And we were hoped to be ready by spring town meeting. And they mentioned that you might still want to present something short just to let the public know what's going on. Is that the case? I just want to let the advisory board know.
Yes, Susan, I'm going to use some different words, I think, to say the same thing you just said. The goal is to not present any warrant items for the fall town meeting, agreed, but I think the hope and plan still is that the MAPC gives a short, brief presentation sort of summarizing our reports and findings over the course of the last year. I think we've also kind of kicked around the idea that it will likely open many questions and comments. I think the goal, and Rich, you might need to talk this through with the folks there, but I think the goal isn't necessarily to have an open, long conversation. I think it might be more to field some questions, record them, and then suggest that the committee will take them under advisement and sort of craft some sort of response as part of our committee meetings and maybe post it to the website, something more along those lines. So I know the interest from the town is to keep it on the short side, and if we start a whole question and answer period, it might drag on. So we've got to figure out how to handle that part of it.
Maybe we could dedicate one meeting to open. You know, obviously they're always open to the public, and people can always ask questions. But dedicate one meeting. Let them know at town meeting that we're going to dedicate the next meeting to their questions, just to keep the town meeting in person part short.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. And, you know, I suppose another idea could be we could have a write-in section, right? Like maybe there's a comment section on our website or something where, you know, a Dropbox where people can drop their questions and we can collect them and put some sort of a FAQ document together, which we've sort of already started. But yeah, you know, Susan, we're open to ideas, I guess, on ways to field questions that will inevitably come from this presentation without extending the presentation itself. So.
Yeah, I communicated with Jay, and he's said that we're looking, you know, to have something that's probably within the 10-minute range, somewhere in there, for a committee report. And then it's not to have a Q&A then, so we do need to set up a time and place. So, no, the committee meeting I think is a great idea. I think maybe what we can do is have a handout and you know, for town meeting, people to pick up where they can, you know, see the meeting, but also with questions and comments as well.
Hey, it looks like a few people are not muted. If you could mute when you're not speaking, that would be great. I tried to send a text to everybody, but it's not. Chat feature isn't open for some reason.
Yeah, thank you. Good.
So I guess, Susan, did that update you?
Yes, that's great. I just wanted to keep the advisory board, you know, posted on what we're doing.
Yeah, so I guess actually I didn't really finish that comment, right? So the goal is to not present any warrant items this fall. It's to have a short meeting. The goal would be to get, yes, as you mentioned, to either the spring or the fall town meeting next year with recommendations. I think the spring or fall next year with recommendations will become obvious as we get to our individual boards and the boards that we're going to for presentations and see what the feedback is. Which is also a bullet point for us to talk about tonight. You know, what boards do we need to get to and who's going to them with what? So I guess that being said, Rich, should we, why don't we start with the sewer, since it's probably the simplest and most straightforward. Do we have an update on the report? What's going on?
So what we discussed with the engineers relative to the sewer is to see, they're essentially on hold to see what comes of where we're at relative to the zoning, potential zoning and potential recommendations, to then do some analysis for us as far as sewer loads. What I can, you know, tell the committee is that, you know, we have the plant's 30,000 gallon plant. The initial map that the committee reviewed back in June for a sewer district area, which essentially coincided with the B-1 district, at least from an initial planning standpoint, there was not sufficient sewer capacity. I think everybody probably knew that, but just to reiterate, you know, there's not enough sewer capacity in the present plant to sewer that entire district, even under present zoning. So if whatever comes of this, there will need to be additional capacity looked at and generated. So that what they wanted to do was get a better sense of where the recommendations might fall, and then look at it from a sewer capacity standpoint. And then both will really be linked much better together, which I think, you know, is ultimately what I think people would want to see, is that they're linked. I can tell you that, like I said, there's not enough capacity in the plant right now. There's not enough capacity to even develop under potential zoning for the properties that are connected to the sewer right now. So, so at this point, they're waiting for this, you know, the outcome from here, and we would guide them on some directions where to take a look at from a potential sewer load standpoint. Because what we don't want to do is have them look at all different scenarios that are really not desired or even feasible for the town. So, for example, I think for the most part, you know, sewer in the whole B1 district is not really a feasible option from a cost standpoint and so forth. So
Rich, how do we know that if we don't? I mean, if 70,000 gallons covers the entire B1 district, why wouldn't we talk about it?
it doesn't, it won't.
What does?
That's it. We have to get to a new sewer flow number.
Right,
So
but I guess I was sort of just like we talked about with the MAPC and their study of what the bookend was for the maximum density based on our proposal, right? Isn't there value in knowing what the maximum capacity would be if the town thought providing sewer capacity for the entire B1 district was a good idea?
if they want to sewer the whole entire B1 district.
Yeah, I mean, say it takes 100,000 gallons to sewer the entire district, and we have 30. We can expand 30 to be 60, and we only need another 40. And that other 40, that other 40 costs $1 million, and making it 80 instead of 40 costs 1.25 million, not 4 million. I mean, why wouldn't we do that? But we won't know unless we have some sort of an idea how many gallons we need for the entire B1 district.
Well, we could, all right, let me back up. We could get numbers for them to sewer the whole entire district. I guess from a moving forward standpoint on what would be the preferred sewer option, that would be a different flow, I suspect. But yes, we can get a bookend number from a sewer capacity number from an academic standpoint. Yeah, they can produce that for us. But what they also need to be able to, from this exercise, is get an idea of, are we, we've been talking about mixed use. We've been talking about scale, number of units, etc. So they need to at least have some benchmarks to be able to kind of plan around. So that's really what they want to try to get.
Right, but I'm a little bit concerned to hear that they're on hold, right? I mean, our conversation with them was the entire B1 district based on the recommendations that were made a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, right? So, I mean, in theory, they should be proceeding down that road, right? I mean, just as the MAPC did and gave us a bookend for our max build out, they would be getting some understanding of what our max sewer capacity our max sewer need might be. Right, and then we could work back from there, just like we're going to do with densities.
I guess so we're not really, so there's a planning component to it. Yeah, they can do that. But realistically, we would have to have, for the next phase of this, relative to the sewer, there would need to be at least some discussion, which we need to do with the Board of Selectmen, that there is even the appetite to sewer the whole entire B1 district.
But how do you have that conversation without knowing what it takes?
Well, we need to be able to produce some numbers, what we're talking about from this exercise.
Right, but we can't wait till this exercise is complete to allow the sewer exercise to be complete. Right. We talked about running parallel paths. So again, I was under the impression that this study group was proceeding down the road of sewering the entire district based on the densities that were proposed by the B1 committee 2 years ago. Right. And that would be the maximum number that we would, we're not talking about increasing the densities that we talked about then, we're talking about decreasing them. So we would be working down from that point. Am I the only one that understood that? Am I making that up? Maybe I am. I don't know. That was my impression of what they were doing. So anybody else on the committee have?
That's how I understood it as well.
Yeah.
Aaron, I thought we were going to have an answer on that so that we could attempt to shape the density for the B1 area.
Right. So Rich, I think we need to have a conversation with them and see, one, keep them moving forward. Two, understand if they understand this bookmark. And then three, I completely understand that we're trying to narrow down what the focus of this is, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. And we don't want to be waiting for us to proceed with what they're doing. So if we need to have another meeting to figure out a way to keep them moving, then maybe we should do that.
Well, yeah, we will, but just like we discussed, holding off on Josh doing some of his work to get a better idea on what's going to come out of these recommendations, they're in a similar boat. I mean, similar situation.
Yeah, except Josh has completed a study to show us what his max build out will be.
Aaron, I can get you maximum numbers for them, but if we don't have, you don't have an engineers go off and design and do a feasibility analysis on a capacity that the town isn't even going to pursue, right?
I don't know that the town isn't going to pursue it, Rich. Again, if it's a feasible number, why wouldn't we pursue it? Why wouldn't we have the discussion at least to pursue it? I mean, I don't even know how much. I mean, if we were to propose a new plant and we were to propose it on the two pieces of town property that abut the school property, right? That's sort of on the outside part of the district. How much sewer capacity could we put on that site? I don't know. It'd be good to know.
Yeah, it would be good to know. I guess I would say, just from a planning standpoint, I think we've had the idea, the concern that's been raised through this whole process of high density in town center and the reservations that people are having. It hasn't moved to a conversation, then in turn try to sewer the whole entire B1 district.
But Rich, we're not asking them to do a specific study of a specific scope of work. We're asking them to provide a range.
No, we are. So the part of the grant process that we applied to was to have it take it further on a preferred alternative to look at plant capacity, the pipe system, gravity, et cetera, where all that would go. So they don't want to be, they're not going to do 3 different scenarios on capacity numbers. I wouldn't think we would want to. I mean, I don't know, maybe we would, I suppose, but it doesn't seem like that would make sense to do that.
All right. Well, on one hand, I'm hearing we can ask them to give us the maximum number. And on the other hand, I'm hearing it doesn't make sense for us to ask them to do that. So which one is it?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying to you is they can give you a max flow to sewer the whole entire B1 district.
Based on what?
Based on the zoning today and based on a future zoning of what's potentially being recommended.
Okay. So that's something they could be working on right now, right?
They could be doing that.
I think that would be helpful.
But
Hey, Rich.
So,
Rich.
Yep.
If we have a maximum density build out by that was done, that we looked at our last meeting, I know those aren't the exact numbers, but if you take the proposed zoning changes that we're making, at least the worst case scenario of that, can you at least run a feasibility test on whether or not those are even possible? Because it seems really pointless to me that we spend 2 years arguing back and forth about which zoning changes to make just to find out that there's no sewer capacity for the zoning changes we've made. We're asking the town to vote on something that would never happen if there's no sewage for it. So can we at least find out what it would take to get the sewage for the max build out that he presented last week?
Yeah, just to clarify, yes, they can do that. The variation from the engineering standpoint in this is what would be the potential combination of residential and commercial that we're talking about. So we've carried on some different recommendations for density, and the thought would be to kind of have a better idea what we're talking about for mix. How many units? Are we talking everything's going to be 3-story versus 2-story mix, 1-story, you know?
I'm
So that-
sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that what the presentation that we had in the last meeting was about? It was showing us at the most logical or feasibility for the build out for town center. So couldn't we just go off of that? Because that's actually, it's at a higher level than what we were actually trying to make our zoning changes for, right? We were talking about staying within 3 stories, and most of them were 3.5 stories. Most of them had, to make it profitable for the developers, it had more residences than what we had actually wanted. So why wouldn't you just go on that? Just that's over what we're trying to do. So it would be helpful to know that. I guess it's I guess my point is that after last month's meeting, some people were a little frustrated that we found out that to make it feasible to build there, we had to go to 3.5 stories. So it kind of defeated the purpose of debating this, for the last year. If we can't get the sewage for that, then why are we even doing this? So we need to know if it's a possibility before we even go forward, in my opinion.
Well, a couple of things. One is we thought that we were basing this on sewer and the whole B-1. I thought I heard discussions throughout here that, we didn't have to do this based on sewer. We would be doing this planning exercise based on part of the town center being sewered and then parts of it not being sewered. So now, clearly, Aaron, I know you said, hey, sewer didn't matter. Remember the discussion, sewer didn't matter?
I think it does, yeah.
So
that hasn't changed.
Okay, so then these changes shouldn't be all predicated on sewer, the whole B1 district then.
Yeah. Josh, and I don't know if you guys looked at it, I'm assuming you did, but of all of when you were testing the individual sites for what the driving development factor was sewer one of the sewer a driving factor in any of the sites?
Sewer wasn't considered a limiting factor. Neither was sort of market absorption. Those two things I went through last time. I guess I'll just add to the conversation that I think the maximum build figures, which I showed last meeting, are useful to consider to look at that high-end bookend, as we've talked about. But I don't think they're that useful a number for an engineer to go too far a road down in terms of these wastewater calculations, because I think the numbers I presented last meeting, are still unrealistically high, both in terms of the amount of commercial that's produced and potentially the residential units as well. So it would be maybe useful as a very high-end bookend, but if they get too much into those details, it will be a waste of their time and your consultant's budget.
All right, so then I guess, and why don't we get through this meeting and then revisit the sewer? Because if we come to some agreement on what a 40R district is and isn't, maybe the more specific study would make sense. At which point they could look at the entire district, but with a inner core and an outer core with different densities, and get to what, as Josh and Rich are both saying, more realistic numbers. So
can we,
seems fine. It just would, we'll see how it goes, I guess. All right, anything else related to the sewer, Rich?
no, not at the moment.
Can I just
Aaron, I have one quick question for Rich. Hey, Rich, when we did the kickoff meeting with Woodward and Curran on this study, they had outlined for us 3 phases of their plan of attack to be able to evaluate, propose, and submit a master plan for us. that first phase is supposed to be completed at the end of August. From what I'm hearing from you right now, you're saying that first phase was completed, but in order to move on to phase 2, or at least complete anything in phase 2, they need more specifics in terms of what they're modeling around. Is that correct?
Yeah, to a degree, yes. So they've done their analysis on the plant. They have looked, as I reported to you at the last meeting, the potential connection to Norfolk MCI plant.
Mm-hmm.
And from the discussions with them, that them being the Department of Corrections, that connecting to that plant really wasn't something that the state had contemplated for, but also the plant wasn't designed around commercial use. It was strictly their expansion and their work at the MCI Norfolk plant is based on residences. They have prisoners that's who they're accommodating. So the idea of sending commercial wastewater over there, that's not the way that plant is being looked at. Now the engineers, I certainly could have them, come to another meeting at some point and go through that for everybody. But to explain more the detail from a technical standpoint, but the overall was that going to the Norfolk MCI plant, the state was not interested. So then that alternative really didn't need to be explored too much further. The other alternatives that is expansion with the existing plant, and then the other alternative would be a new plant or phasing, or it could be a combination of expansion of the existing plant and then a newer plant down the road based on future sewer growth. So those are really kind of where they're floating as far as from a sewer standpoint.
But none of this has been discussed with Mass DEP at this point, right?
That's correct. No.
Okay.
What they, like I said earlier, what they want to be able to do is get a better sense of where we might be headed as far as desire from the town standpoint based on this work, to then pursue those other alternatives to get back to us.
Can I just ask for a clarification? I was always under the impression as we went through this exercise that any development in the B-1 area could possibly be a combination of private and public wastewater systems. It wasn't necessarily based on a pure public system being put in place. Is that incorrect, or?
No, that's correct. That's how I've proceeded with this whole study. At least that's how I've heard. We have a sewer piece to it. There's a sewer plant that potentially could add additional capacity for growth, but it wasn't solely predicated on a public sewer system. It was a combination of on-site and public.
That's what I thought. Yeah, okay. I mean, I guess I might agree with Aaron. It's still nice to know what the number might be, but it's not like if we don't have that number, everything comes to a halt. I mean, we still could do things that we've spoken about because of the mix of private and public systems.
Yeah, so just for the committee and the public listening, they have put everything in. It's all into an Excel spreadsheet with all, and so we can simply say, look, take all the commercial. They have the numbers based on the present zoning for commercial. It really would more or less be coming down to how much more residential of we would be potentially looking at. So say, for example, people wanted to look at commercial build out under present zoning with 200 new dwelling units. They could run that number. They could run a number based on 300 or whatever, So so I don't want you to think like they can't do that. It's just a question of what makes the most sense from a practical standpoint to have them run, to look at evaluate a plant expansion or a new plant, and then the costs associated with it, and to investigate it with the DEP as well, to really take it further, as if this is the preferred option the town would want to pursue, to bring it all the way through to get funding to construct it. So that's part of the sewer study grant that we have, is to take it all the way through to schematic, not quite schematic, but probably conceptual design, and cost that out as well. So, having discussed the sewer, it would seem like we should jump back to the 40R district, at least start there, and see where we go. So we had consideration of essentially one. Aaron, did you want to share your presentation that you had with the different scenarios on, or you want me to pull up? So we could visually look at it. I don't
think I have it anymore, Rich.
I'll just bear with me. I'll get. Oh, great. Just bear with me. I got to connect to the server. Get the.
All I have is the end condition.
Okay, I will. Let me get my. I'm going to call it the presentation. Or I'm going to share my screen so we can. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go. So this is. Can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to switch to the next slide. So the next slide, can you see? Technically, it's 3 parcels, but this one is Borelli, but this one here, 9, and this little parcel here, 7, is both from Easter Development. So that potentially would be, I'll call it the smallest of potential 40R district. I'll go back and forth. So then the next one is slightly larger, which includes 6 and 8 Liberty Lane. And then a larger 40R district, which we've kind of discussed around the idea of having an inner core. As you can see, those same properties, but then the existing properties on Main Street down to the MBTA. And then it terminates at 138 Main Street, was a little bit larger 40R district. So just back up and a little bit for back to discuss the 40R district. So the 40R district, as we talked about before, would be initially be based on present zoning. And then if we were to proceed with any district, then there would be a calculation based on the minimum 40R density to figure out between the base density and a future 40R district would be. Now, a couple points about, and I'll start with this one here. So these properties here, 6 and 8, and the properties where Eastern Development is, they are connected to the wastewater treatment plant at 30,000 gallons a day. So in this case, they would only be able to go as far as what the present capacity is, unless additional capacity was added to get up to the minimum densities for 40R with the wastewater plant. So that, having said that, if we were to present these as a 40R district, it would only rise to a conditional 40R district because the infrastructure wouldn't be available for them to build out to the minimum standards, minimum requirements, excuse me, of the 40R district. These other properties across the street on Main Street, and these other ones here are outside. They're not connected to the present wastewater treatment plant. So if this larger district were to be considered, they would go in as present zoning versus future zoning based on either on-site septic, or they could go in under sewer. But again, it wouldn't be feasible because until the sewer capacity was available, they wouldn't be able to meet those higher densities on sewer. Private septic, that's different if it's feasible. So the reason why I'm saying that at this particular point is, while this might be a larger district initially to consider, it's not all able to be built out once, if the town pursued the district and it was implemented. We don't have, at least for the sewer related properties, we don't have the sewer capacity for them to go beyond what they already have their reserve capacity for, without trying to squeak out additional capacity in the plant. If there is the unused capacity, we have to go through the state, the DEP, to be able to get approval to do that. So there's a few layered steps here. And what I'm saying is that if the town pursued the 40R district, it could be voted on, approved, but as far as some of the incentive payments that would be associated with it, they may not come to the town until the infrastructure was there to support it, if it had to rely on sewer. So just something to give consideration to. So what I'm like to try to do for tonight, I hope, is to try to get a sense of to what extent the committee would like to pursue a 40R or a 40R at all. So is it a smaller, is it something on this scale, a middle scale, or a combination of, or nothing at all? And so I'm throw it up now for
Right. So Rich, can I take the screen?
Sure. Yep. Let me just give you, hold on. Should I get you Go ahead.
All right. So this is the diagram that Rich was talking about that I shared, this is based on the MAPC build out analysis, right? So just, I guess, cutting to the chase in this conversation, the blue crazy polygon is what I would recommend as a 40R district. And the 40R district would be largely based on our design guidelines, largely based on the warrant articles that we proposed 2 years ago, with the caveat being the minimum density in those numbers was 16 units per acre, and the minimum density here would need to be 20 units per acre. So that the minimum density would go up a bit from what even the MAPC exhibited here. So the X's are properties that when we asked Josh and his team to pursue the max build out, they had some outlier properties that they dutifully put max build out analysis potential on those sites for us to consider. But I would argue at this point that we would be proposing changes to the zoning in the blue polygon area only. Outside of the blue polygon would remain the way the zoning is today in town. So we'd essentially be creating an inner and an outer district. The outer district would be consistent with the zoning the way it is today. The inner district would be, it's subject for debate later on in this meeting, but largely based on some combination of the 40R guidelines and the design guidelines that have been put together,
including some of the zoning recommendations as well. Aaron.
Yeah. So
Aaron, how many separate properties do you have zoned as that you're saying should be a potential 40R?
how many properties are in here?
Yeah.
Correct me. I can't tell exactly from this map, but this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I think it's 16.
Okay. So I'm going to say this one time and then whatever happens, happens. And I don't need to continue to debate it. But one of the reasons that I was asked to join this committee was to give you some insight into what the advisory board would support, as well as my breadth of experience with town meeting on what would pass. And I can tell you that if you go to town meeting right now and you tell them that 12 different properties in the downtown area are going to be zoned as 40R with your residential density, it will not pass. You can choose to do it however you want. You can take a vote. I can be outvoted. I'm fine with that. I'm only here to give you my opinion. I'm not here to cause problems or argue or fight or anything like that. This is just my experience, having been doing this for a few years now. With that said, I think in my personal opinion, your only hope for getting a 40R passed at all is to limit it to 1 or maybe 2 lots at the most. And you need to convince people of why it makes sense to concentrate your residential density in that area so that it frees up the other lots for commercial properties or mixed use properties. If you go this route, I do not think it will pass. Again, not here to argue or to cause problems, just giving you my opinion. Take it for what you want.
No, thank you. That's what we're here to discuss. So, Kevin?
Rich, in the 3 options that you just presented, do you have the acreage of each outline?
Let's see. The first option, let's see, hold on a second. I have to get your number on the third one. The first one's approximately 5 acres, and then if you go this one includes 6 and 8 Liberty Lane is 7 acres. Before you, I did, Kevin, if you would just indulge me one moment. I want to share with the committee a site plan for 6 and 8 Hill Street. I'm sorry, not Hill Street. Liberty Lane, as you then asked me the question, okay? You don't mind? Can you see my screen?
Oh,
No, I'm sorry, hold on. So, you see my screen now? Okay. So, on the top of the screen right here, this is 6 and 8 Liberty Lane. So 6 and 8 Liberty Lane and Walgreens and Silla's and the Rehabilitation Center and the Stop and Shop lot were permitted through the plan multi-lot development through the planning board. When that was permitted and approved, the drainage for Walgreens and Silla's and the therapy center is right here, the top of your screen, on underground on 6 and 8 Liberty Lane. So to develop these two properties, this stormwater, so that these two properties, this system is designed to handle stormwater for these two lots, which is, I'll show you the, so on top of your screen, if you look, this is essentially this is the layout that they permitted with this planned multi-lot development. So you have this building here fronting on Liberty Lane, this building here, a parking lot and parking all in the back. So that's how this was originally approved and permitted. And the drainage on this lot serves this development here and this development here. So for any future development on 6 and 8 Liberty Lane, you're looking at either coming up with a new stormwater design to be able to then utilize the frontage along Main Street, or you're looking at a potential build out layout, something along this line. I mean, it's not exactly like this, but basically buildings fronting Liberty Lane and a parking lot in the back. So as you consider the 40R district, this is a constraint on these two lots. Now we can certainly add them down the road. We don't, Susan, as your point, we don't have to include them right now. But if they were included, they're already constrained to a degree. So maybe that helps or maybe it hurts. But I just want to raise that point just as you think about it. And I can go back to the, I'll switch back to the PowerPoint just to. So this is 5 acres between 7 and 9 Liberty Lane. And I take, Susan, your comment and your analysis, I think is what I have heard. So we're doing the planning, future planning, but I absolutely understand the you know, that a bigger district, while it is constrained from build out because of infrastructure coupled with a build out or there are existing buildings on these properties that would be in that larger 40R district that would either have to be partially built, torn down. I mean, those are more the practical ends, but in reality, that's not a blank sheet of paper, the rest of those parcels, but I understand from a town meeting standpoint in general, just trying to convey that message to the public, that might be very hard to understand. So I get that. My only point about that larger area is that they're all existing buildings on there, so they're not a blank sheet of paper to build from. Is there other committee members have thoughts on the 40R district as far as number of properties potentially?
For me, it's a calculation on if we're going to try to overlay 40R in an attempt to create a more walkable downtown, but also put 40B developments more at bay or have more leverage against those. Then the math in my head would have to be, how much of this is benefiting kind of those two topics together. And since these are mostly, so like the 3 properties as 40R, those are all greenfield properties. A developer can come in, like they can't make a grocery store now, but they can pretty much do whatever else they want. And, no more 40B for 2 years, let's say maybe 3. But after that, what happens? So the decisions we make now kind of can help us further down the road to help stem that. So I'm actually okay, I think, with a full overlay and also the 3 properties version here.
Okay. And by the way, just I'll state it just so it's understood that this going through a 40R process is a process unto itself. So while, there might be a recommendation, this would need to go to the planning board and we would need to go through a whole process to create the district. So while it might be this or whatever this is, it might, shrink or it might grow a little bit. So that's not the final result. And so I just want to make that point. So, but it's a starting point. I guess we're trying to find that starting point. So Ed, do you have thoughts?
The other property that concerns me is the one across the street from it. It's sort of partially, I can't read the number, but yeah, that one right there. I mean, if that weren't developed properly in all of our discussions about developing a downtown, if it weren't developed properly, that's really a stake in the heart of, any downtown development. I think that to me almost is almost one of the most critical properties to protect. If there was a row of 16 townhouses there, for example, I mean, there goes our mixed use downtown or even commercial downtown. It would change the whole character of the center of Norfolk.
Mm-hmm.
Probably more so than the big 5-acre property as far as a downtown goes.
And that, so that property there, I agree. I mean, I know the discussions that we had over the summer with them when we were starting up with the zoning is that, they wanted to, at least the present owners wanted to be able to maybe add some apartments to the property, but the wastewater was their constraint on their site to be able to do that. And they were hoping to have sewer, although I don't know how far they went to really investigate, what it would take or not take, but I can at least report to you that's what their thoughts were.
So you're saying there's some thoughts in their minds at least of some kind of development on that property?
Yeah, they see their thought was that they might take and go above the existing commercial that's there now today, put another story or maybe 1 story, maybe 2 tops, which, in concept I understand it, but when you get into the more the granular detail of it, you know, does the building structurally able to do that? You have commercial tenants on the first floor. Are you gonna have them stay in the property while you did this? Or will you make it, you know, will you vacate it? So like, my point is that I've dealt with other commercial properties that wanted to add on top of existing. And that's not, there's a lot of sequencing and timing, and it's a lot easier said than done when you try to execute it. So I'm not sure that feasible for them. I know that's what they want to do, but I don't know how far they really analyzed it and looked at it from an architectural design, engineering, tenant perspective, all that, you know. That's my only comment about that, but
But
they will.
if we go back to the comment that Susan made about the appetite in town meeting and advisory board, or whoever is going to look at this,
Mhm.
and there probably is not an appetite for 12 to 16 properties. Are we, as a starting point, as a committee, more better suited to look at, let's say 6, 8, and that across the street, whatever that number is it 138 or one
I think it's 150.
150? And just say that to us is the heart of town. That's what we're trying to protect through a 40R proposal. So at least we have can keep control of that, the heart of our town. Would that present a better presentation to the rest of the town at town meeting and whatever, and make more sense to them than this broad, expansive plan that's a lot harder to digest, as Susan suggests?
Yeah, true. The other thing I just want to add for you to remember is that as far as the 40R district goes, you can have sub-districts and they don't have to be contiguous. Although we're showing a contiguous district here, like this inner core, it doesn't have to be that way. So for example, if you wanted to, the one that you had, Ed, you mentioned this one here.
Yeah.
You could do the Pacini property on Rockwood Road.
Yeah.
So you could, that's an option as well if the town wanted to consider that. So I think it seems like we're really, the discussion would be a smaller district, and then maybe, well, maybe it's a larger going to a smaller, or maybe a smaller to a larger, but certainly not a 16 property district that you see on the screen. It's just,
Right.
I mean, I want to ask Eileen for your input, if you might.
Just trying to keep everything just straight. I mean, I think it's interesting. I certainly understand, you know, the difference between the 3 and the 16 is quite a big jump. So I agree with Ed. I think erring on the side maybe of a smaller number to begin with might be more amenable to most folks.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, you know, if you want to just go all in, which we've been trying to do for a while. So I'm on the fence.
Okay. Susan has her hand up.
Hi. Do you know, has anyone looked into whether or not the people who abut these properties, if it goes into 40R, would they have any legal challenges? I don't want to do things that are going to get us tied up in land court or have more legal issues for the town.
Or is legal, I mean, abutters to it? So the district, so first the district would have to go through town meeting, you know, to get approved, as well as Department of Housing Community Development. there would be, we'd have to have public hearings ahead of that before we could move forward on any adoption of any district. And it's been, as far as legally challenged, I mean, it's lawful to create a small sub-district if that's what you're, like, if we just had, like this property, is that what your question? Like if we just had one parcel or?
Well, it's more of a question of, it's a twofold question. It could be a legal challenge in any sense, meaning could it be a legal challenge in the sense of an abutter who doesn't want a 40R and was not given any chance to speak, or it could be a legal challenge where one parcel and they're side by side gets to do a 40R and the other parcel can't do a 40R. It could be, I don't have a specific legal question in mind. I'm just asking if abutters are going to have an opportunity or going to be able to. I don't want to see us tied up in court for years to come because of this. I would hope that we could get those answers prior to doing anything.
Yeah, so I think what we would do is once, let's say for discussion purposes, we said we're going to do 6 and 8 Liberty Lane and Stop and Shop, and that's the district. What we could do then is we can pull the abutters to abutters within 300 feet, which is the normal, the typical standard for any permitting projects, and send them all a notice to come to a meeting to discuss the creation of a possible 40R district and go through it to get their input to it. We could even, I suppose we can go even a little further out if we wanted as well, to get their feedback. No, I mean, again, there could be somebody who would want to be in the 40R district and they're not in, they might be upset. That's a good possibility. But I think we would want
Rich,
to.
isn't the answer here that we need to just review it with town council and move on?
Correct. That's what I was saying. I would just want to get some answers on what legal challenges they would have hypothetically.
Sure.
One more question just while I have the floor, sorry. Do we know, have we decided yet which one we're doing first, or if we're doing them at the same time? Meaning, what comes first, getting the 40R approval or getting the new zoning changes approved? Or are we doing them at the same time at town meeting?
So that's something that we need to decide. I can tell you this. If we decided to change the underlying zoning to a higher density and then turn around and come in with a 40R district on the same properties, the incentive-based zoning payment to the town will be based on a higher density. And then, it would be an interim higher density. So what was suggested by Department of Housing Community Development, if you believe you want to create the 40R district for those particular properties, you should bring that district forward. So when you apply and you do the calculation between existing zoning versus future zoning, the incentive payment logically would be more to the town in between. You don't have to do that. I'm not saying we have to, but that was just one suggestion. If you already kind of know what you want to submit for 40R, you should do it sooner than later. They can be simultaneously too. So we could have a 40R district on the same town meeting if we wanted to, and the zoning changes for the other properties that aren't in the 40R district. Those are kind of all decisions that the committee needs to discuss. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's really, it's what, again, the comfort level of the town and how to try to proceed on these.
Rich, do we know the lease terms on that large property? Exactly when the current lease is extends to?
I think I think the present lease is to 2028.
2028?
Yeah, and then there's right to extensions beyond that.
And I guess I asked the question because if that property is sort of locked up for an extended period of time, why would we waste our efforts now on trying to rezone it when the likelihood of something happening there isn't for a while yet? I mean, we could come back to that at another time.
So the idea of doing it now, potentially, the thought being is that maybe with the 40R in place, it might create the incentives for Stop and Shop in Eastern Development or some variation thereof to consider pursuing it later if it makes sense economically. That would be the reason to do it sooner than later.
Okay, I hear you, and I guess if I look at the weighing, you know, the impact at town meeting to the voters and the likelihood of Stop and Shop and Eastern Standard there all of a sudden being motivated to develop it, I'd be more concerned about the impact on town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the short term. I don't mind coming back to them in another year, coming back to that parcel, but I'm just thinking priorities, that's all.
Kevin?
All right, I'm going to do story time for a quick second. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Sure.
All right. So one of the ways that I work through perspective in town is to reach out and talk to people, call people. I know I've subjected many of you to that before, and I apologize for that. But it's a great way to be able to round out your perspective and get a feel for the concerns and the risks associated to some of the things that we're proposing. Now, in that time, obviously, a lot of that has evolved with some of the new information that's come out or some of the reassurances that we've provided throughout the course of our discussions. But people seem to fall into three distinct schools of thought in town right now. You have one group that says our current zoning is perfectly fine the way it is. Why? Because there is green space in town center. Somebody wants to build something like somebody did at Union Street, then they're more than welcome to go ahead and do that. But otherwise, everything's working exactly as it should. Our town center is exactly how we want it. Of course, that doesn't take into account the fact that Mr. De Placido identified very clearly that that was a one-off, incredibly unique situation that he accommodated for, but still, everything looks the way it should. The second one is that changes to zoning should only be made to encourage commercial growth, that there should not be any consideration for residential at this time. That if the master plan identified that we want a walkable town center, then that is what it should provide. And we're happy to talk about ways that we could develop with commercial, but residential should not be a component of that because it does not achieve that goal. Despite what we've heard from our meetings with developers and other individuals from a planning perspective, that's the stance. And the third group, who is obviously much more open to commercial growth and understands the benefits of some residential growth as a means to achieve that commercial, but also sees the benefits of the affordable component being centered into an area that is best suited for it. They seem to be a little bit more open to these ideas. Now, there's certain things that'll throw them off, and it varies, but I think the big thing that throws people off is the sheer volume. The fear of town center becoming something that is uncharacteristic of the town. And, you know, as we go through these discussions and we talk about, you know, 1 parcel, 3 parcels, 14 parcels, I think we need to take into consideration what is actually going to have a chance of getting done at town meeting. From my perspective personally, I think that at one day, 50 years down the road, we might absolutely be able to get to a point where we have a 16 parcel 40-yard district. But I think in order to get there, we have to start small. We have to bring to town meeting a singular parcel, a singular project, if it is a combination of parcels, that clearly identifies to people what the vision for that project is. We know we want to do a mixed use development. We know we want it to look like this with one building offset to the side so it's not over Main Street. We know these are the types of uses that we want, and we know this is the design guideline we're going to use. So when we put this forth, we know that the town understands, okay, we're dipping our toes in the water here. We're uncomfortable with this, but you've told us this is exactly what we're getting. If we get anything, let's try it out. So what happened? What's the worst case scenario there? It doesn't work. Nobody comes to build that specific vision that we have. We have a 40R district that sits there, and we get to reap the benefits of having that 40R district there as a tool to use against any negative 40B projects that come in the future. On the positive side, somebody might agree with our vision, be a partner with us in that development, help that come to fruition, and then we have what we need to go back to the community to say, look, this worked out. Let's talk about what else we can do with this format to be able to expand town center that meets everybody's expectation. I want to make sure that we are doing something that is achievable and that we know that there is an appetite for, because there is going to be a lot of work that goes into the 40R proposal as part of its own process. We've done a lot of groundwork up until this point in terms of the zoning bylaw changes. But I do want to make sure that if we're going to go down this road, we do something that we feel there's an appetite for in the community and will not be dead on arrival when we go to talk to other boards and committees in town. That's my piece.
Well
Thank you,
said,
Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. I would just like to add that based on what Kevin was saying, I think that's a methodology that, and I don't mean I in the sense of me as Susan Klein. I just mean I as someone who's involved in town meetings, who people come to and ask questions, and serve on the advisory board. That is something I can sell. That is something I can convince people that would be a good thing for them. I can't convince people that 12 lots as 40R is the way to go with maxed out density on each of them. I can't. So you can make your decisions however you want based on that information. I'm just trying to give you my expertise in this field.
Well, I guess my point would be, and thank you, Kevin, I think that was really well stated. I guess my point back to the fact that if we're trying to reduce the number of the 40R, that what's the alternative is the 40B, which is maxed out density. So at least with 40R, we have an opportunity to guide what we want, as well as, guide what we want. All right, that's all I can come up with at this moment, but I guess that's my point. What's the alternative to 40R? 40B.
I did have one question. Thank you very much for all of you, Susan, Kevin, and Eileen. I did have one question. The 40Rs, would we be opening up the bidding to conventional builders, or could some 40B builders that we now do business with put their hats in the ring?
No, it would be open to everyone, including 40B developers that, if they wanted to consider it, that have done developments in town already.
And our current building codes would not be, they cannot override our current codes, correct? As it would be in a 40B situation?
So that's correct. They would have to follow the 40R requirements that we would put in place through the zoning bylaw change. And then the regulations that we talked about would be a companion to it, would deal with the design aspect of it.
Okay. So I'm on the zoning board, so I am seeing a couple of projects that we're looking at in the downtown district that have come a long way from the big boxes or very large buildings that we started with. Mainly where I don't remember the name of that cafe. It's owned by Al, and he's out of Rentham, but that's come a long way. I can give a lot of, so basically we're trying to intercept them before they get picked up by 40B or somehow steer them. I wanted to ask a question about the Stop and Shop. Are they still involved in downtown? I'm assuming they still own that property.
So Stop and Shop's Ahold still has a lease on the property, and then Eastern Development is the one who actually owns the property.
And sometimes when some of these large conglomerate businesses are involved, they have some sort of contract. I'm not sure with who, where other businesses or another supermarket could not be within the same vicinity within a mile or 2 miles. Is that the case here, or that is not the case?
I think from our understanding is that I think they originally acquired that site back in the mid 90s to actually do that, to prevent, either develop their own store or prevent future larger grocery stores within the region. I think at this point, though, the fact that they're trying to get out of this lease, I don't know if they would be as concerned about another grocery store, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. I do own property in Rosendale on the Forest Hill line, and there's a number of supermarkets within the close vicinity of the 6-family that I have that are mixed use and offer a lot of character to the surroundings, and also have either a spice market or a smaller version of a supermarket, of a smaller Whole Foods or whatever. Has the town been approached by any ideas like that in the downtown area? Or has it been strictly like, Stop and Shop is the only option we're looking at?
No, actually, so the first realty, the present company that is actually marketing the Stop and Shop, marketing the site for Stop and Shop, had mentioned when I reached out to them that this site really could be a good site where it would be independent under one roof. So for example, if there was a flower shop, they were independent flower shop. If it was a butcher, they're a butcher. So they would be under one roof, but they'd all be independently operating. So it wouldn't be, it's almost like a indoor farmer's market, if you will, in a way that, you would have different, might be a fish market, but different, they would specialize in their particular area, but they would all be under one roof. And they thought the fact that the demographics for the Norfolk area might be a good fit for something like that. Not necessarily a bigger grocery store trying to do a smaller store, but something that's more of a collaborative under one.
Is that still a potential, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And would that negate Stop and Shop's interest, or would that be incorporated?
Actually, so the broker that's trying to broker the deal for Stop and Shop suggested that as a potential option for this property. So I think if it could happen and Stop and Shop could get out, they would get out. I will say this. I mean, take it for, I don't know if he would disclose this at a public meeting per se, but the impression I got from the present broker, and it's not Colliers anymore, that this site was something that they did enter into a long-term lease deal, but it wasn't a site that they really were more likely going to develop a grocery store. And now with the grocery store markets within the region, it's not a viable site for them, and they would like to get out of it. So at this point in time where we are, it's more of a deal where they could break the deal with Eastern Development as opposed to them worrying about who's in the deal, so to speak. If you understand what I'm subtlety of it.
Now, I mean, images and pictures are everything. I'm sure people are familiar with Brothers Market in Medfield, and there's another smaller market that has those type of characteristics in Wellesley. If we could attract something like that, we'd still be able to fill a need in the town and still be able to somehow offer residential units. I mean, maybe, I don't know if that was ever brought up at the meeting. I wasn't at the meeting, the last town meeting where this is being voted on.
Hey, Rich, if I might, our discussion has gone in many different ways tonight, and we're way off the agenda. Could you bring the committee mission statement up on screen, please? I'd like to get the committee's opinion on how the discussion tonight fits into the mission statement of the committee.
Okay. Let me, I'm just going to grab the agenda. Am I screen sharing right now or no?
Yep.
You don't see the screen,
Yep.
right? You see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there's the mission statement. Did you want to speak to it, Aaron, or just?
I don't, I'd like the committee's opinion on
The statement itself?
the discussion tonight and the goals of the committee. And, you know, it seems to me like much of the discussion tonight is going in a very different direction. So if that is the case, then maybe the recommendation of the committee to the planning board is that we go in a different direction. Maybe that's a different committee.
Mhm.
Or maybe it is consistent. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the things people can jump in and disagree or not agree, but I think the notion of the walkability that I think we're trying to achieve is a combination of if you live in the surrounding area and you can walk to town center, there are things for which you would like to walk to. And you don't necessarily have to drive through. There's the walkability that if you go to one location in town center, there are other things that you might want to walk to and not have to drive through, and you can walk from one place to the other. So for example, maybe you go to the library and then you go grab lunch, and maybe there's a future restaurant there and you take in some cultural things on Town Hill and then you go to a restaurant. And you might do that.
So Rich, I get the concept of that.
Okay.
And I don't think that's my question. I think my question is right. I think if you read through this mission statement, the goal is to recommend some potential changes to the zoning downtown for a purpose, right? To plan for a more financially viable, diverse town center and future population growth,
Mhm.
right? So obviously there's scales to that. Agreed. But the conversation tonight should be structured around this recommendation, the recommendation that's being made to the planning board, right? So what's our recommendation? How do we go about structuring what that recommendation is?
I think I heard.
I think that question is to the committee, Rich.
Okay. Yes.
Are we done discussing the size of the 40R overlay? I thought that's where we were at.
That's where we started. I agree. I think the conversation went in many different directions, but to what end does the 40R district support the committee mission statement?
Well, since no one else is speaking and you're asking for opinions, we're trying to plan for growth, and we're trying to put it all into a downtown area, growth that we're going to see over the next 20 years, when in reality, most of that growth would be done with housing in different areas, because the growth that we see in Norfolk is not really the age of people who want to live in apartments. It's a suburb, and I know it has a train station, but it's still a suburb that's almost an hour outside of Boston. So we keep going at this from a model of if we build it, they will come. Except I actually think that most people in this town want a walkable downtown. None of them want residences. They never say that. They want businesses and walkable downtown. And I understand from a developer's point of view that they're not going to put in the commercial space without being able to get the residential space. The problem is that's not what people want. So everything we're doing is making it harder for people to approve this at town meeting. That's where I'm at. I guess you asked that question, so I wouldn't have said that otherwise, but that's where I'm at. As far as the 40R goes, like we said, I would think that we would want to limit it to maybe 1 or 2 at the most. Because it's like the carrot and the stick. If you talk them into the 40R over here and you say, put it here, this will help us. It'll make us able to say no to 40B projects. It'll allow us to only approve mixed use on the actual frontage of downtown. This is what you asked for, but we have to do this over here or else we're not going to be able to get to that. I think that's the way you approach it at town meeting, and that's how you sell it. And that's a winning argument. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk. You're still going to have a ton of people who are opposed to it, but at least it's a way of getting people in the door and having them listen to you. I don't think they will listen once you say we're going to max out the density on every lot in the downtown area with a 40R. I think they're going to shut down.
I think the problem is that people may want one thing, but what they're going to get is something completely different. And so it's too bad if they don't understand that, if they don't take the time to understand it. I don't know what else to say. I understand what you're saying, Susan, but too bad. I mean, at some point, right? I mean, you have to throw stuff out there because, again, they may want one thing, but the developers are going to develop something completely different, and people are going to complain about now what they see in town. So,
correct. But you can't.
I'm on Erin's side. Again, I think if we're going to try to prevent 40Bs and try to get a mixed use development, that I think we should do the 40R. Plus, if you explain to people they're going to get money back from the state, so that mitigates the taxes, they're going to see that as a positive, one would hope.
Correct. I don't think we should not do a 40R. I just think we should only do a small number of 40Rs, 1 or 2. I don't think
the problem is, but if you only do a small number, the rest of them are going to be 40B by the time we get around to doing anything else.
Not necessarily, as Kevin said. Once we designate them as 40R, we are allowed to say no to 40B because we've already committed to having our residential density in one area.
So just to qualify that quickly, there has been 2 communities that had an existing 40R district that were able to deny an incoming 40B application. And the reason that the state cited for the backing of said denial was because they had a existing 40R district, and B, had taken responsible steps to be able to create affordable housing in recent years. Now, obviously, we have done that, number 2 there. We have been taking the steps to develop affordable housing given the number of 40B projects that we put through and the existence of our housing production plan. My point was that if we had designated a 40R district, that would be another tool that we could use to potentially deny additional 40Bs that were unfavorable to the town. That's more the point I was trying to make.
I think the 40B discussion is a very strong argument for town members. I don't think anybody loves driving up Rockwood and looking at that gash in the side of the road. And whenever it's happening at 194 or 198, when that development starts, I think people are going to be more shocked at what could happen in the downtown. So when we started 2 years ago, I don't think 40Bs were as visible as they are right now, and I think that's something that has to be part of our tool chest here, in our discussion as to why we're doing this. It's not simply just to get more commercial stores, it's to make sure that we get a downtown that's something that we want and not something that's forced on us by somebody else.
Hi, this is Martha Henry. Can you just clarify the 40B argument? I just want to understand the accuracy of what's being said.
The-
Whose 40B argument, Martha? I'm sorry.
Well, I hear Eileen saying if we don't move forward, they're all going to be 40B, and it feels inaccurate. And so I just want some clarification on it. Susan just mentioned the protections, and then you mentioned that, and now we're back to if we don't do this, we're going to get all 40Bs.
And frankly, the last discussion was revolving around that the density was actually greater with your proposal as opposed to the 40B, right? Like we haven't had one that has exceeded 16 per acre. And Josh's last recommendation was over 20. So,
Or even higher.
Someone please remind me what we're protecting ourselves from.
I just want it to be accurate because I don't appreciate being told we don't understand it or town residents won't understand it again and again and again. We understand it. So if you could.
It's not clear everyone here does though.
Yeah, like the density, some of the density we're proposing is more than the current 40Bs. So I would just like someone to fact check the record, please, for the public out who is viewing this as well. Before it just gets lost in this argument, please.
So I think I'll take a stab, and I think the idea of is to direct some higher density development where the train is in town center that is non-40B that potentially gives the town the benefit of a couple of things. One being the composition of units within the development can be 1 or 2 bedrooms. They don't necessarily have to be 3 bedrooms if it was a 40B. The town can put in place the design guidelines, how to have the development, what it looks like by regulation versus what 40B doesn't have. There's some incentive payments that are there for the town, but I think it's more of a larger discussion to try to encourage a resident from the rental side of it, something that would make more sense from a market standpoint and the location from the train to be able to get to count a higher number of units, because we would count all the rental units like a 40B if it was a 40R, but not have to follow exactly the same requirements to then put the town closer to 10%. So in the long view, the other parts of town that are lower density and not, it's similar to, Cleveland Street or the one on Seekonk and so forth, that are really probably more geared or more inclined from a developer to pursue an ownership, single family home development, which doesn't get us all the units, but may run a little bit higher risk from a school cost that we kind of talked a little bit about too. It's not the perfect answer, but I think it's the idea to try to provide a little bit better location for a higher density from a transit standpoint to get some benefits for the town long term so that the town could achieve hopefully 10%. Because as we do the next census count, even with all the 40B developments, the way they, and I understand, Chris and Martha, I know you've been very involved, the density went from much higher density down to a lower density, which in one sense it's good because they're, it's not as dense. And then they turned out to be ownership. But on the flip side, we still have a pretty big gap to get to 10%. So it's kind of trying to strike a balance where it's not ideal. And nobody's saying it's ideal, but it's a little bit better option when it comes to the affordable housing side of it to try to get us through that path. Because some of those other locations they might turn out more to be, ideally for ownership developments as opposed to rental. I'm not saying they couldn't be rental, but generally speaking, the market is kind of, the interest is in the ownership out in those other areas outside.
Rich, can I just add, one of the things as I understood when I read about a 40R, the advantage is that we could dictate the 40R to be mixed use. A 40B is not to have that same dictate. A 40B can come in as only residential. So it's not a density thing, as I understood it. It was that we can get a mixed use designation as opposed to not having that control with a 40B. That's what I understood. One of the advantages of 40R.
So I just want to clarify though, I'm not saying I don't understand the 40R. I just I'm wondering why it's for Eileen, it's an all or nothing. Let's do 16 lots when Susan's saying, hey, or Kevin's saying, hey, let's just sort of be really planful and thoughtful here and do 1 or 2 and see if people can understand the vision and the concept. And then the argument turns into people don't understand zoning, so let's just go all or nothing, or we're just going to be inundated with 40B. And my question all along has been, one, your some of your building by right. Yes, there'll be some commercial, maybe vacant, which is what we're seeing in other towns. And I really want to be clear, and I did send a letter to try to be clear. I'm not like anti-development, we shouldn't do anything, let's just sit. I'm not in Kevin's category 1, right? I'm not. And I've said that from the beginning. And I do not appreciate feeling like I'm either 1, not smart enough to understand what's happening here, or 2, it's in my backyard. So that's the only reason I'm vocal. I want to have a real transparent discussion about what are the real threats of 40B on all of those lots we've now identified and talked about over and over again. I appreciate the 40R. I'm not against the 40R. I mean, I guess that's all I'll say, because I did lay it out in the letter, and I'm surprised that it's back at that people just aren't smart enough. Just don't get it. It's rude.
I'll leave it at this. You guys all feel fairly confident, it seems like, with what you've got. So my answer is run with it. Can't wait to see you at town meeting. Have a good night, gentlemen.
And ladies, or everybody. So that's it.
And I will go to bat and tell you that at the zoning board, they are advocating for the town as best they can. They are facing many challenges and have a lawyer on staff. I think we have a couple lawyers that the town employs, and and the end result is not without effort. It's a lot of effort. We start off with one project and we end up with something that's a lot more reasonable, and probably takes about 2 years to get there.
I know, Josie, I've been in many of those meetings asking very difficult questions. I've been very involved. I'm not taking a dig at the zoning board or anybody else. In my letter to all of you, I asked that it would be a full view. Kevin did a beautiful job of laying out his vision for 40R, how he collects his data, how he makes his decisions, how he thinks about how people think. That's all I've asked this committee to do. And again, I'm made to feel like I'm belaboring points or I'm not smart enough to understand what's happening here. And it's really insulting. So thank you very much. Good night.
If I could just say something quickly. The threat of 40B is always going to exist until we get to 10%. We've taken many planning steps to be able to try to alleviate that threat. The housing production plan was a big one 4 years ago. That gave us the ability to develop and then be able to enter into safe harbor should we meet certain thresholds in affordable housing development. With our latest efforts, I do believe that we are currently, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, in a 2-year safe harbor from new 40B proposals. Is that correct? Right.
Yes.
So with that being said, we can, in a strategic fashion, try to chain together good proposals for good projects here in town to continue to enter into contingent safe harbors until we get to 10%. But the fact of the matter is that we cannot get there with 32 house 40B projects, single family homes that only yield us 8 units of affordable. Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we need to get to somewhere in the range of 125 to 150 affordable units to get to 10% without the 2020 census.
We're at 130. But
130. So that number will go up, and we will be behind the 8 ball once again for another decade. So the threat will always be there for 40B. Now, to the Henry's point, we have been fortunate in that the projects that have been brought forth, both through working with amenable developers and with a ZBA that has done a great job of finding the balance between what works for the community and what works for the proposal, to have projects that are put forth in 40B that are not overbearing to the town, that are not contentious, and that are not considered negative proposals. But we cannot guarantee that's going to be the case forever. We know that right now there is an outpouring of people moving out of cities and into the suburbs and following along the transit lines to be able to find new residences. And we expect that's going to continue for the next couple of years. We saw the plan that Aaron had highlighted in terms of school-age children growth that highlighted the 10 to 20% population growth over, I think it was 25 years. This is stuff that we need to plan for. And I think that the 40R proposals that we're talking about give us some benefits on many different fronts associated to that, both 40B, developing affordable housing, planning for more density in the right areas of town so that if we do get a 40B proposal for a residential neighborhood, we may have the ability to redirect it to somewhere that's more appropriate for it. So yes, we have not seen this onslaught of terrible 40B projects. And while the threat is always going to be there until we get to 10% and out of safe harbor, that they could come to these parcels in town center, we really haven't seen that be real just yet. But the last thing I'll throw in there is that 5 years ago, I believe there was a committee similar to this one that was proposing some zoning changes for town center upon the threat of 40B. And at that point, it wasn't a tangible threat. We didn't have the kinds of threats that we have today. And now after that, I think that we've seen something like 7 to 9 projects come through in that time span. Not all of them come to fruition, but some have. And I believe that threat is a lot more tangible. So as we go into the discussions about how we move forward in the town meeting and reaching out to the community, I know Rich had identified that 40R has its own process that will allow for community feedback and outreach. I just think we have to be cognizant of that, you know, there are going to be threats out there, even though we haven't necessarily experienced them just yet. And Rich, feel free to jump.
But I think the one thing I would say, and Josie touched on this point a little bit, the 40B projects that have been before the zoning board, there's, you know, I would say maybe 1, maybe 2 that I think were relatively had a decent reception from the community, as far as they came in and as they're proposed from a density standpoint and where the location is. I think the ZBA did yeoman's work actually with the developers to shape them in a way that they got to a point that it wasn't ideal, but I think everybody walked away at least better than it started from density standpoint, impact on the community and so forth. So the town has been, I think, somewhat, although I will say some people probably will say no, that they've been, you know, not the greatest developers or whatever, but I think the town has been fortunate that we've had some developers that have worked with the town well to shape those 40B developments. I think my concern is that the town in general will be desirable location for a variety of different reasons on the long view. And it's something that we can, to getting the town to 10%, to put it in a position where you can have the ability to say, yay, you know, and this is where we want to go, and this is appropriate, and not have to have battle lines all the time, that the ZBA is really important. And this is an area of town center that can help get us to that point. There was a multifamily project that was proposed at 194 Main Street. And then it was originally senior, then it went down to market rate, then it went to townhouse. And so I'm not sure that, at the end of the day, maybe he really didn't want to do multifamily anyway. So it went a different direction, which is fine. I think it's going to turn out to be a nice project. But we need to be able to work cooperatively with the developer to come up with a multifamily where we want to see it happen, where we can get to the affordable number that we need to be at, but also help the business community. The one thing that we did talk about, and I know the town desires, but is the harder aspect of this, is to create commercial interest in town center without the economics of the marketplace. People could develop commercial today in town center, and commercial is a challenge no matter where it is. The residential that we've talked about thus far in this mixed use is at least to help the economics of building it up from the ground up. That was so the one thing from the town as a whole, and I get it, I understand, I listen, I hear people as well. They want commercial in the town center, but they don't want the residential. And that might just really honestly not necessarily be achievable to the extent that the town would want. So the idea is to kind of step back and create a balance to be able to do a little bit of both. And I think we've talked enough. I think we need to look at a smaller scale 40R district to start. It could grow a little bit, but at least start there. My concern is we get nowhere and then we're still exposed. And then the people who come in and are concerned about the trees going down that you mentioned, Ed, and the traffic and so forth doesn't go away. And we're in a worse position 5 years from now. So can we at least straw poll move with the smaller 40R district to move it off the dime? Because
I think to align back to Aaron's ask about whether or not this lines up with the mission statement, I think it does. All of the pieces, all the individual pieces of the mission statement are satisfied with hyper focusing on one lot, whether that's the Stop and Shop lot or another one, and identifying that as a potential 40R. And that kind of is a slow walk to, or it's baby steps to help get us to where that is. And we can talk about economic development, but that's kind of horse before the cart sort of thing. We kind of need to get this process started, and it sounds like a lot of us on the committee would be for a smaller 40R.
that's kind of sense I've gotten. So is that
I do agree with you, Richard. Maybe it's not my decision, it's everyone's decision. And I'm not going to shortchange the Norfolk resident whatsoever. They are the most discerning of residents. They think about things. They're educated in all walks of life. I'm definitely not going to shortchange, our residents. I'm sure each one of them has something to bring to the table. I was just expressing, the challenges that we have and what we're facing on the zoning board. And if you can get less of these projects to the zoning board where we're not fighting about where we're going to put the dumpster, or, there's barely enough room to wrap the, fire engine around, if in case there's a fire. If we, I feel like we're facing safety issues with where we're going to put the school bus stop. None of these developers seem to care. We walk out with something better than what we started with, but it's a lot of work. If we could at least bring our codes with us here, and another thing, has anyone during the last meeting or the town meeting, were there any photos or images that were shown to the residents of what a mixed use could look like? I own a mixed use building. It brings a lot of character. It's not just one big box with all these apartments and condos. There's a cafe there, there's a little pharmacy, there could be a little post office. There could be a drop off for UPS. It brings a lot of character. It's not this big box. I find it quite attractive. If people can see it, it may help.
We have, before we have shared some images of some mixed use buildings. And they're part of the design guidelines that we had developed. I think it seems as if we should at least consider a small 40R to start. And I think we're talking about essentially the two parcels that Eastern Development owns that are Stop and Shop. I would consider that third parcel, which technically is an Eastern Development, it's Borelli, but it's, it may make sense from a area standpoint. If I'll show you real quickly, as the district. And if you want to, if the sense is to expand it, you could expand it. But really this here, this and this, well, back, sorry. This area that's highlighted in white. I think I've heard before, and Susan was, to this point, I think if there's going to be higher density residential in town center, I think there potentially from that site, there might be more of an appetite for there because there's the ability to do a lot with the design to make it fit in and not seem overwhelming. Hopefully that's still the case, Susan, from your standpoint. I think that's.
Yes, I mean, if all were to be perfect, it would be great if we could reach our safe, well, I guess it's not really safe harbor, but reach our affordable housing quota with this one lot, as well as for the mixed use purposes, maybe have a small grocery store or a restaurant as the commercial space below. It would make a lot of sense. It's a destination spot, with no in and no out. So it's really only somewhere you would go if you were trying to reach a specific destination versus you can't see it from the road. So you're not going to have that walkable feel in the sense of, oh, look, I'm driving by and I see 5 or 6 shops that I want to shop at. That's, the lot that I would choose to do. But again, that's just my opinion.
Right. Well, I think, is there a sense sounds like there's a sense to at least start there?
If I would be able to make a request, I'd like to hear Aaron's perspective. I know that he's been a proponent for making as impactful as a change as possible in line with what the mission statement is. And I think that we typically get to the best middle ground when we hear two ends of the perspective. So if you wouldn't mind talking to his perspective, that'd be great.
Yeah, Kevin, I don't know that I have much new to add to the conversation. I feel frustrated today as well. I feel like the conversation we're having today is the same conversation we had 2 years ago. I thought the goal of this committee was to set out to establish planning guidelines, for the next 10, 15, 20 years for the B-1 district. It seems as if that task is deemed too difficult to proceed with and get approved, and the goal should be shortened. If that's the general feeling of the committee, then so be it. I don't know that that's the task that we were assigned with, but maybe that's my interpretation of the goal. I don't disagree with what Gary said in saying that, the mission statement could be scaled from one site up to the entire district. I suppose that is an interpretation of the mission statement. I guess it just seems to me, conceptually speaking, as Kevin mentioned, that if you're going to go through the effort of hiring a consultant to do a study and convince the town that it's the right thing to do for the town, then I'd like to think it would have more of an impact than on one site in town center. If that is simply too big of a goal, then I don't know. We need to find a way to get off the snide here and move forward, because this conversation that we're having today, it's happened too many times. It gets us nowhere. It's a circular conversation, and it's not doing any of us, the time that all of us are putting into this it's not doing any of us justice. So to that end, if moving forward with a smaller site or one site will at least show forward progress, I'm all for it.
Is there any value, just out loud, hypothetically, is there any value in a proof of concept like this, where 40 Rs here, and these are our zoning changes for now, and then X amount of timeline, say 18 months, 24 months, something comes along, there's something developed there, it meets all of our best case criteria. What happens after that? Do we all call back the Justice League and we get into a Zoom meeting, and hopefully maybe by then it's in person, and then we say, all right, so this worked here, so how do we scale this out? I mean, my background's in the software development, so a small thing is great, right? We'll just get this out here, and here's a product, and everybody loves it, and then we'll scale that out. But zoning, it seems like this has been a long process, and something that's been attempted before. So do things have to be reset and restarted, and does this whole conversation have to happen from scratch whenever whatever the 40R that we deem is viable succeeds?
I think that's an interesting question, Gary, and it's one that I think the public has been asking of us for a lot of our points. Is point to case studies where what you're proposing has worked well. Is there a case study out there where a town committed to a small district and it was successful and it led to an expanded district? Great question.
Right. I think, people have added on to other districts, so there aren't. I think I think Gary, you would say this, that we've tested, if you will, a lot of the ideas of district-wide improvements or district changes, more density, a whole variety of things. And I think the test so far is that people aren't necessarily averse to the change, but it's the order of the change and the magnitude of the change. So I would say that starting out with a smaller district, and say, as we get through this process, that here is a larger district that could be expanded over time, which can be done. It's not an all or nothing. We could get our feet wet and see a positive project. I mean, until 18 Union Street came in, we had no mixed use that was built from the ground up. And that development happened, and I think people said, you know what? I think, relatively speaking, I think everybody thinks it came out very well. And it's a very good product. So it's a little taste. There's a good project. We plan for a much longer view, but I don't think it should be scaled to a pace that the town would be willing to work with and accept and be comfortable with. And I don't see any harm with the 40R on a smaller scale hits the mission statement. If it expands out, it still touches the mission statement. And if it goes even further, it still continues on. But I mean, you know, I think, as you know, there's a lot of people that moved to town in Norfolk that had a certain mind's eye of the town of Norfolk. So some positive changes in town center that's mixed use that gets us on the way is better than no change, that we can get ourselves further along, that maybe gets us further along with 40B in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. So to Aaron's point, I would say start small and it can be expandable, and we can include that in the recommendations that we would, that perhaps down the road, there may be in other towns, in other cities, where a property owner approached the town to say, I would like to do a 40R district, and you could add that down the road. So it may spur some property owners coming forward and thinking about it, and then the town would consider it.
Rich, but again, well, you know, we find ourselves talking in circles about this. The question was, is there an example we can point to where this happened? So let's find one, or two, or seven.
We have given you, well, we have examples.
What are they?
We had Norwood that we talked about.
That started small and ended up expanding?
Yeah, they had one and then they had a second one.
I don't remember that.
It was a half-acre property for 44 units that expanded out to another 3/4 of an acre for 15 units. Reading is another one that started off with a downtown of 25 acres that expanded out to another 10 for another 200 units.
We have
Marblehead had a third of an acre, so 17 units that expanded out another acre and a half, 47.
These are
Those are the only
40R.
ones I can say.
Was that 40R in Norwood?
yes.
Yes.
You know where that is?
Do you have it in front of you, Aaron, that you see it, or?
Guild Street and St. George's Ave.
The three towns that you cited all had existing commercial areas already. I think that's the difference in Norfolk, and our mission statement is we're looking to create or develop our commercial area. They've all had developed commercial areas. So I think where our 40R may go is probably very important to our mission statement. If we put a 40R in a place that doesn't match with our mission statement, I think we've wasted our time.
Well, we are talking about the B-1. Aaron, I would say this, the challenge of giving examples is exactly what Ed just said. We can come up with examples, and then somebody's going to say, well, that's an existing commercial area in Norwood, or, well, that's the city center, or, well, this is that, this, you know. So am I good? I don't think we can find absolute apples to apples. And I think sometimes the sense I get is that we're trying to find absolute apples to apples. We can give you comparable examples if people are okay with that. But if they want apples for apples, I don't know if we're going to find it.
Oh, maybe that's not a coincidence.
Maybe.
We have full commercial development where Ann's Market is, Deli. Was that commercial before that was built
No,
on the
No.
side of town?
no.
Okay.
I mean, Easton might be the maybe closest example. I've reached out to the planner east. I haven't heard back yet on their experience to use them. They might be the closest in, and apples to apples that we would have. Again, I think, like you said, we're going around a little bit.
Just for the record, St. John's Ave and that area in Norwood where they had that 40R was not a thriving commercial business district. They recently, the town of Norwood rezoned that area to exempt it from the parking requirement. They rezoned it as a downtown district, so it would be exempt them from the parking requirement to attract business. So even though it was zoned commercial, I mean, I really wouldn't consider that a very, a thriving commercial area as it is now.
So can we consider moving on a smaller district and touch on some of the other topics for tonight at least?
Yeah. Float a vote,
Kevin,
consensus, I should say.
Aaron, Eileen?
That makes sense from my perspective.
All right.
I agree.
Okay. So if we jump to some of the zoning amendment discussion. So when we talk
Rich,
about,
I mean, we're an hour and a half into the meeting. It's 10 o'clock. I don't know how we could start the zoning amendment conversation now,
yeah,
or why we would for one site. I mean, what's the proposed for one site? I mean,
I don't know that we've agreed on one site, Aaron. I think we've agreed on a smaller
sorry,
scale.
yeah, smaller scale.
Do we want
I
to
mean-
take a vote on that so that at least we have some forward progress for this evening?
yeah, I would,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, so,
What specifically are we voting on?
yeah, so what are our options? A one site, a limited multi-site, maybe 2 to 3, or a full site? Are those our three options?
So I would entertain somebody to propose this white that you see here.
I'll make that proposal. I propose to make the largest lot, the 40R lot, and leave the other ones to specific zoning changes.
But that's technically 3 lots, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's 5. It's 4.5 acres, 5 acres.
so it's 7, 9, and 11 Liberty Lane. I mean, sorry, 7 and 9 Liberty Lane and 11 Meeting House. Those 3 right there.
That's essentially the Stop and Shop site.
Essentially.
Yes, correct. I make that proposal to move forward with that one and see how it goes at town meeting.
I think it's difficult to say. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't pick a smaller district. In the scheme of things, I don't know how you could just pick a district area without talking about the amendments that go into it, right? So, I mean, the amendments you would talk about for the entire downtown or a larger district would probably be a different conversation than if you're talking about a smaller or one site type deal. So, I mean, if that's how we want to start the conversation, if we want to start the conversation by saying the way we're going to proceed with this is a 40R district, maybe that's where we start. Agree that 40R is the way we want to go, then agree on the size of the district, and then maybe the potential zoning amendments filter in behind it, right? Because for instance, it doesn't make any sense to argue about residential density because it has to be 20 or higher. Right, so that conversation's done, right, with 40R. So
some of the other components of the changes, Aaron, do apply to it though, except for the density. Building height, setbacks, parking, so forth. But so who's not to say, I suppose, that some of these recommendations might be considered for some of them for a larger non-40R inner core? Maybe not. I don't know.
well, that just stubs your own toe on a future 40R district.
I know. Trying to
Right, so then what happens with the sewer study, right? If what we're saying is there's only one site that's 40R, what's the sewer study do? Is it just the one site, or is it some future expanded 40R district if the first one's successful?
I think I'd have to have them consider a future expanded district only from the standpoint, at minimum, if we go back to this map.
Right, so then do we have to discuss what phase 2 is?
So the discussion with the property owners in the B1 district that have expressed interest in sewer, the discussion was for future redevelopment capability, flexibility, not necessarily needing more density residential related. So for example, if you recall Dunkin' Donuts, they were looking for the sewer to be able to tear down potentially the old Dunkin' Donuts, build a new Dunkin' Donuts and put some residential above it. The higher density that we've contemplated really wasn't something that it wasn't in their equation. Their sewer needs were more from a site flexibility standpoint. Again, the gentleman across the street at 158, 156, whatever it is there, to be able to add some residential units. So we can look at an inner core and make some presumptions on future residential as part of it, but I wouldn't want to not have the sewer study including sewer in these areas, which were the original catalyst to kind of pursue this. I mean, 134 Main Street, Dunkin' Donuts they wanted to put a restaurant in, a full scale restaurant. And the sewer was the limiting factor for them. They have the access to the gas. They own the property. So what I would say, Aaron, is we could talk to the engineers and see how to scale
Right,
it.
but if you settle on an expanded sewer district and you don't restrict it by either zoning changes or 40R, then a 40B comes in and takes advantage of the expanded sewer capacity.
So that's, I don't have the answer as I talked to you, but that's one of the things that we have to discuss with the sewer district. The creation of the sewer district, sorry, and the regulations of the sewer district.
Okay, can I take a stab at this? May I have an objection? No, no objections. Okay, good. So what we've established here tonight is that I believe that there is a majority support in favor of starting small in terms of putting forth 40R as the preferred initiative to be able to address the concerns as highlighted in our mission statement. The scale of said 40R is intended to be smaller in nature to start, but to be the first stage in what we would consider to be a tiered approach to be able to addressing the larger concerns highlighted in that mission statement. We're going to potentially start with the single parcel over what we would consider Stop and Shop. And what we would be looking for as next steps would be some definition in how we would structure that 40R proposal or the specs associated to what we would want or expect to be done in that area. And then what comes after that will be, you know, some recommendations. Rich, I think we'd lean on you for how we would tier out an expansion, what kind of thresholds we'd be looking for, milestones in terms of development and whatnot, to be able to identify what that longer term vision looks like.
So can we just slight friendly amendment to it? Air quotes, one site is those 3 properties that Susan originally. So 7, 9, 11.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody, or did I just throw a bunch of words into a meaningless speech?
It makes sense. I mean, I made the motion about 10 minutes ago, so.
Well, we didn't see you in the dark there, so I was kidding.
Sorry.
Sorry. All right. Well, there was a motion. Somebody interested in second it?
Before we second it,
Good.
are we gonna vote on one option without knowing if there's other options? What if we vote for this, then we don't have any other options? What if we turn it down, then we start talking about other options? So how is that gonna work?
Well, we can. You mean other 40R options or?
No, well, parcel, I mean, that's one parcel is part of this first motion. That's the first.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think, Ed, you're welcome to make a motion for 3 or all 12 or all of
No.
the whole B1. I mean,
No,
I
I
think the
know.
motion can be made for anything.
No, I recognize that, Susan, but I'm just saying, if we vote on this first one first, and I guess if it passes, then we don't know what another option is. Because we don't have any other options out there. That's all my point is.
I think we were going to attempt to start somewhere, which is maybe 7, 9, 11, with the understanding that it can be expanded and amended over time. So it's not, this is a starting point, not the end point.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I heard that. And I think that we all agree with that. And I think that's a favorable thing, is that this is just the start of something. It's not the end.
Correct.
I guess it's just, where do we start? We do have one option already on the table that was put on the table by Susan. We have that one 3 parcel package.
Right.
So we pass that, then we don't talk of any other options. That's all my point is. And I'll say it. I mean, I favor the very limited also, but my option is maybe 6 and 8. That's all my point is. It's 6 and 8, because that to me is more aligned with our mission statement of the development in the downtown, where I find this first parcel is just a little bit offline. I'll call it. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's just a matter of where you view which is more favorable. That's as simple as that. I agree with a very limited approach. I think that's where we have our chance.
So technically, Susan's hasn't been seconded yet. If you want to make a motion for yours and see if it gets seconded, we can.
Well, that's if it doesn't get seconded, I mean, it's got to get addressed first. I mean, in fairness, it's got to be fully addressed.
Kevin, the parliamentary, you know.
So yeah, so we've introduced a level of formality into this process that might have been relatively unnecessary. While it's pretty structured in the way that we've been doing this and putting out a motion, waiting for a second, not seeing a second, therefore the motion dies and you can accept another. Sure, we can go through that process, but I think the bigger thing is to just talk through it without the procedural stuff associated to it, and kind of just come to a consensus about how we move forward. And if we find ourselves with option A and option B out there, then we could take a vote. But having option C, D, E, and F out there is going to make for a very messy procedural outcome. So Susan identified that, you know, there is favor towards the Stop and Shop lot, which includes the 3 pieces that we talked about. Ed has introduced that if we are to focus on a single project, that he would prefer that that be the Liberty Lane 2 lots, so as to focus on Main Street frontage commercial development. So at that point, we would see what the feeling is of the rest of the group. Do we want to do just the Stop and Shop collection of 3 parcels? Do we want to do just the Liberty Lane collection of 2 parcels? Or do we want to consider doing both as the 40R district? And I would pose that to everybody for their feedback.
My only concern, I'm not opposed to doing 6 and 8. I just want to put that out there. My only opposition was to designating all of them. But if we're talking about residential density, do we want the residential density to be on the main road? Meaning it's what everyone sees, or would we prefer the residential density, what's going to amount to somewhere around 80 apartment units, to be set further back, where you wouldn't necessarily see it as you're driving down Main Street? That would be my only concern. But again, my push was to get it down to 1 or 2 lots, not to, you know, disagree with any specific lot. Just food for thought.
Well, I guess to even make it more complicated, I guess I'd even ask the question, I wonder if the public would even view those 3 empty lots as one anyway. So if we were to bundle them and say 6, 8, and I don't know what the number is, you know, of the Stop and Shop lot, would the public view that as one parcel anyway? If we were to put the 3 together, I don't know.
Well, I believe they're owned by the same person right now. My guess is that if that person chose to sell them, they would sell them as a bundle. But yes, I would think that you could feasibly have developers come in and buy only one of them. But at least if they're all 3 designated as 40R, then all of them would have to comply with the residential density in that area.
Right, that's what I mean. But I'm saying also from the point of view of town meeting or our public being, would they view that as, well, that's really a lot of different parcels? Are they looking at that as one empty big lot now anyway?
So just
are we missing the opportunity to bundle them? That's my point. Are we missing an opportunity?
Right.
I think most people in town view that as one lot. Everyone refers to it as the Stop and Shop lot or the lot by MBTA. So I do think they already think of it as one lot. And I think it would be an easier sell to say, we're going to put this huge apartment complex, but it's not going to be on the main road. It's going to be set back by the train station. You're not going to see it, et cetera, versus we're going to put it on the main road. That's just my opinion. Obviously, it's just an opinion.
So just a point to clarify, the 6 and 8 Liberty Lane are under the same ownership, which is separate from the ownership of
Right.
Stop and Shop.
Right. No, Susan, I think I wasn't clear when I said, I know there's 3 lots in the Stop and Shop parcel that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I guess I wasn't clear. I'm sorry. I'm saying lot 6, 8, and the 3 Stop and Shops. Does the public look at that whole green area as one lot already anyway? That's my point. That's when I said 3. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay.
I don't, if you're talking about the section across from Silla's and Walgreens, I don't think people assume that and the Stop and Shop lot are together. I think they would view the one across from Walgreens as a separate lot than the ones that are grouped together by MBTA.
Okay, yeah.
Hey Josh, when you did the build out, what did like 6 and 8, what did it look like from I don't remember off the top of my head as far as maximum.
It's about 4 acres, isn't it?
No, but I was thinking from a density standpoint. I don't think there was really that many units you could push out to meet all the requirements, I thought. But
Yeah, they were, they're more narrow sites, so it was limited in terms of what you can achieve on them. I don't remember the exact numbers. I could pull up the spreadsheets while you continue the discussion. But if they were made a part of a 40R district, the density is on average across the district. So it's not that the number of units could be still biased towards the large Stop and Shop site and not squeezed into those more narrow parcels.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
so then I suppose it might, just from a process standpoint, maybe it would be a little bit easier to just add them in if they need to drop off than try to add them in later. If people
Yeah,
don't
again, that's just a point of view that I put out there. That's all. I mean,
understand.
Yeah.
And the common threads are all vacant lots.
right.
It seems like it might be a happier middle ground between the two ends of the conversation that the committee's been having, where there'd be not the minimal amount, but a few more parcels which are of critical importance in the town center, being those on Liberty Lane and Meeting House Road.
Do we have to decide which parcels we are comfortable with right now? If we've made the decision that
No.
of what we want to do going with the 40R, it's probably within this parameter of lots. Can we sort of just hang it out there right now for a while and do other stuff, and then maybe at some point finalize that?
Correct. I'll defer back to Kevin. He so eloquently said it that we need to kind of consensusly work towards something, and if we want to do this and then we need to change it, we certainly can. We're not locked. There's no
Okay.
until we sign and submit an application, quote unquote, you're not locked into anything at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, give us time to digest everything too.
Correct.
You know, we really just, I mean, we've made a decision here.
Right.
That's a big step.
Yes.
To clarify too, I know that there might be some uneasiness with the way that this committee puts forth a recommendation, but it's important to note that our goal is to provide a recommendation to be acted on by the planning board. Our goal is not to carry forth a definitive direction over to each and every board and committee in town and then to town meeting. Our charge is to provide something to the planning board. Now, the planning board might take our recommendation and toss it in the trash. That's their prerogative, but that's where our responsibility line kind of stops here, is we need to bring something forth as a recommendation to the planning board for them to take forward with, you know, their long-term planning processes.
Agree. Well, that's
a good point.
all right.
So with that being said, I think what we should do is toss it around the table. We have a direction. We're saying that we're going to pursue a 40R district that will include the 3 individual parcels that make up the Stop and Shop lot, as well as the 2 individual parcels that make up the Liberty Lane open space.
Yes. Awesome. That sounds great.
Correct? Okay. All right. So that being said, let's toss it around. Does anybody have an objection to that being what we move forward with? Ed?
No.
Gary?
No.
Eileen?
No.
Susan?
Yes. But it's fine. Go ahead. It doesn't matter because it's a vote. So just keep going.
Aaron?
Can I abstain?
Abstain. Josephine?
I don't have any objections now.
Okay, so there we go.
All right. Well, thank you. Now, to Aaron's point, I guess it's 10:11, 10:15. I guess there might, I suppose you probably don't want to discuss. Well, actually, let me ask this. There's really, of the proposed zoning or zoning amendment changes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, it seems as if the two really is building height and parking that would be worth a little discussion on, and to go to the planning board with. And for example, I think we could certainly talk about the some tweaks to the shared parking at a later date. I think we can work around that. I don't think this is critical, but it would be nice to have some guidance on the parking per unit count and the building scale. And I'll take a leap, and I think, Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you thought that we could work within the existing definition or building flexibility related to height for 3 stories and meet some of the objectives of this work.
Yeah, I'll just maybe, Rich, build on that comment and make an observation from the work we presented in the last meeting.
Okay.
And that I think that there were 2 things I observed, that we were producing too much ground floor commercial space. That was one observation I made last meeting, and that therefore adding, if you were to reduce the height to the 3-story, which it is today, but offer some flexibility on the ground floor, which would allow the backside of the ground floor to potentially be a residential unit to support the residential uses, et cetera. You could bring that extra half-story of residential space into the ground floor effectively, keep it at the existing building height, and allow the flexibility so that you are providing a reduction to make more feasible the commercial ground floor space while providing some additional ground floor residential unit space. The specifics of that would have to be worked out, but I think the numbers that we were seeing in terms of the build out and the financial feasibility analyses indicate that that seems like a possibility if it's something that the committee would like to entertain.
All right, so Rich, I'll go a step further and say, why limit the height? If we're starting with one site and our ultimate goal is to limit 40B projects, and a 3/1 construction project, 3 stories of residential over 1 level of commercial, gets us commercial space downtown, gets us 120 to 140 apartment buildings, affordable. You're starting to kill a lot of birds with one stone, right? You get commercial space that's usable. You get your 40B 10%, and it's all done on one site.
I think the part of the challenge to that, Aaron, and I don't disagree with you on theory of it. I think the amount of commercial ground floor might be too much to be able to lease for the scale to get those many units. That was the concern, I think, a little bit about that. I think one other comment to that, the thing we talked about with Josh is that if it was residential on the first floor, it wouldn't be fronting on the street. So it'd have to be the back of the site, so to speak. So at least that's
We're
what-
making zoning recommendations. We could recommend what we want.
right. Yeah, no, I know. I know.
Aaron, when you say no height requirements and max it out, are you speaking just for the 140R lot, or are you speaking for just the zoning changes in general?
We're talking about the one lot that we're talking about now, right? That were 3 lots, right?
Okay.
So, and I don't really mean no height requirement. I mean, what I mean is if what we're really trying to achieve with this site is one building that does a lot of things, perhaps limiting it to 2.5 stories or 3 stories is limiting it. I mean, if we can go to 3 stories of residential or 3.5 or 4 and get to 120 or 140 affordable units and meet our 10% affordable goal, it seems like a big win.
That has been my standpoint from the beginning, is max everything out on the one lot, leaving everything else in the downtown area to be subject to zoning versus 40B.
So, yeah, to answer both questions, I think what I'm thinking is just listen to the discussion that, yes, we can have those requirements on the Stop and Shop area, the sub-district, if you will, versus I'll say 6 and 8 Liberty Lane could have different requirements because they could be viewed as sub-districts. So having it just asked you a question about the zoning, maybe it makes sense to kind of make some refinements to the recommendations, Josh, based on this 40R limit or what we're talking about, maybe. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
But I don't understand what Josh's role in this is, Rich.
Relative to the zoning changes or the zoning requirements that would be incorporated as part of the 40R district. That's what I'm talking about.
Do you understand the question, Josh?
I think now that my interpretation of what was stated is, now that you have a boundary potentially of a 40R district under consideration, would you like me, committee, to take a look at my thoughts regarding the characteristics of that 40R district? That's something that I don't think we've considered in the past specifically. We've considered the characteristics of the zoning district at large, or with the inner outer core, the way that was previously defined, but not with a 5 or so parcel 40R district boundary. I think it, yeah, I see potentially a couple options there that you've all been discussing. You could just look at changing zoning in that 40R district. You could look at a combination of the 40R district with some other recommended changes to the zoning at large in the B-1 district. So I think those are the 2 main options.
So you understood what I said.
Josh, just as a quick question, there's an inherent benefit to not changing zoning in the district as a whole in tandem with a 40R proposal, right? We would want the 40R proposal to be done first before considering additional changes to the rest of the district.
Yeah, I think if the longer term ambition is to expand the 40R district eventually, then probably you're right. You want to leave the district where it is in terms of its current density characteristics.
Wait a second, I'm sorry. Is there a thought out there that there'd be the 40R district and then we would actually entertain changes to the rest of the district?
Yes.
I thought I was assuming that the only changes we would propose would be to the 40R district and the rest would stay as it is today.
Okay, I think that idea originated from what I just said, and if it's not out there, it's not out there. I didn't mean to put it out there.
The point I was trying to make was that the 40R, for which is an overlay district, you can float different requirements in different portions of the district. And that was my only point, to have maybe Josh take a look at. So for example, the idea of people thought like, well, maybe residential on the ground floor makes, and I'm just going to go to the map just to make the point. Hold on, bear with me a second.
Well, let's make the obvious point. There's 3 lots in this district. It might be 3 buildings, not 1.
We're talking,
There's no guarantee that these lots will be combined.
no, I know, well, right now,
Right. So, but this conversation started with, wouldn't it be great to have 1 building or 1 development solve all these problems? But it might not be 1 development. It might be 3.
it also might not be 1 building, right?
Correct. Or the large lot could be subdivided and it could be 4 or 5.
The point I was trying to make was this portion of the site that has some fronting towards the residential side, it may make sense to have residential on the first floor as opposed to fronting right out on Liberty Lane. And you could float different requirements based on the 40R district. That was the only thing I was trying to say with that point, to what Josh was saying. But
It's 10:30. We're 2 hours in. What's our path forward?
I think we have set up a meeting with the planning board next to discuss the 40R district, which is 7, 9, 11, 6, and 8 Liberty Lane.
Get their thoughts.
Yeah. Is that what other people see as the next step?
Is there value to having Josh work, like he had mentioned, work within the parameters of that direction to provide a more concise recommendation as to the specifics of what would be done with those 40R specs before we go to the planning board? Or is the high level proposal of utilizing 40R with the strategy that we talked about tonight enough to kick off that conversation? From your perspective, Rich.
I mean, I would like to have a little more meat to discuss with the planning board. I think from Josh on those points, because the idea is to present a 40R district and then discuss the finer points of the flexibility it has, that you can create sub-districts within a 40R district that do not have to follow property boundaries. So it gives that higher level of site planning, if you will, that I think is worth for them to hear. I mean, the idea of, if we said to them, it might not be a bad idea to have residential on the first floor, I think that might not be received well based on all the other discussions we've had up to this point relative to zoning in town center, because there was concern about not having residential necessarily on the first floor. But as we talk about it in terms of the 40R, they might be more receptive to it.
I'd argue that you need to put the proposal in terms of the benefits of the proposal, right? What are the benefits of this small 40R district, right? Those should be outlined. What are the potential executions of the development? Agreed, they should be outlined. Right? What is the maximum number of development? What's the maximum height? What's the maximum density? These, all the same questions that we've been answering for a year and a half are going to get asked, just on 3 sites instead of 80.
Yes. Yep.
Well, wouldn't it be 5 since they voted to include 6 and 8?
5 parcels, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think Aaron's right. I think we need some parameters for the planning board to give them some vision of what this might look like. In fairness to them.
So what if, maybe I talk to Josh a little bit, maybe Josh can send something out to the commit. Could the committee meet maybe one more time before we meet with the planning board to just kind of go over those points?
Yeah, I'm available. I think you have to set up a war room and a whiteboard to get all this stuff done, though.
I think so. So the planning board. The other thing I did want to, I would like to ideally have a planning board discussion outside a normal planning board regular meeting agenda. So there's not the,
But again, Rich, now our entire future schedule is shot again, right? So we started this meeting by saying the MAPC was going to make a presentation at town meeting, right? That now seems like a not good idea, right? I mean, maybe MAPC presenting is still a good idea, but they're going to be presenting a completely different project than we currently have contemplated. And there's no way it's going to be thought through by fall town meeting. So we're not getting in front of the public with any of the developments of the last year at the fall town meeting. Which means if we go into spring with recommendations, we will not have made a public presentation. Right, so our entire schedule just gets pushed out again.
so you suggesting we just go to the planning board in October?
I'm suggesting that somebody give some considerations as to what our schedule is at this point in time. And the execution of the proposal that's been presented this evening. What is the path to getting it presented to and approved by the planning board and move beyond that point?
Aaron, don't you think you don't think there's a benefit, since we've only got a very limited time, like 10 minutes to present, just to present the concept of what is a 40R, just to introduce the definition of what that is to the public at least, so they hear what that is first? I mean, in 10 minutes, you're not going to get into some deep detail. So at least you've got the concept out there.
I think the public's going to want more meat than that. I don't know that, I mean, you could ask Jay what he'd be willing to entertain too. I mean, town meeting isn't usually an educational, session. It's usually focused on some specific proposal with, details that the town needs to contemplate for reports or presentation, right? So I don't know. I can't remember a town meeting that I've been to where there was a general informational presentation.
Committee overviews do that occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this is a committee, so yeah. I mean, at the end of town meetings, committees get up and they give their 30 seconds of what they're up to. This would just be more of a presentation. Not speaking matter-of-factly that I think one way is better than the other. I'm just saying that, committees give their updates.
Yeah, this was being done under as a committee report. I know that the guidance I got from Jay was 10, 15 minutes tops. It wasn't, and again, not to get into it's an update, not to get into Q&A and a back and forth. I think the concern is still overall, I don't know if we're inside, gonna be outside. I mean, we're still, so he's trying to limit things a little bit. But he did say we can, the committee can provide an update to town meeting on the work.
Hey guys, my opinion is that we just go to the planning board at their next meeting and give them a brief overview of what we're talking about and keep to our same timeline. I don't know about anybody else, but I would have to think seriously about continuing if this goes past Springtown meeting. This is a lot of meetings for years with no real forward progress. So if we're not going to make Springtown meeting, then I would probably give up my spot and hope somebody else from the advisory board would join in.
So let's just go with discussion October 13th planning board meeting of where we're at. If you wanted to have a meeting prior to that, just to review the discussion, we could the week before, just to, you know, make sure we hit the highlights. If you wanted to do that. We don't have to either, but we could.
That's fine with me, Rich. Anyone else?
I can't make the 6th. I have another meeting already that night.
I was thinking the 5th of October.
If that's Monday,
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, that works for me.
I think I'm
sorry, Rich, when's the planning board meeting? The 7th?
No, the planning board meeting is the 13th of October. But I was thinking just if the B-1 committee wanted to just, you know, talk through the presentation points for the planning board the following week, that's all.
We don't want to do it on the 12th so it's fresh in our minds, or do we want to do it the 5th so that it gives us time to adjust if we decide to really throw a wrench in things?
I was thinking give a little bit of wiggle room to make adjustments if needed, but I'm a little
All right, I mean, that works for me. The 5th is fine. I'm on board.
I can do the 5th.
yeah, have Gary hang out in the room, maybe you can get a preview and then you can help us out ahead of time.
He was for a while, but then he decided to go elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, is that okay, Aaron? I mean, you just to kind of talk it through.
I have no objections to what's being proposed, Rich. I'm at a loss for words this evening.
Okay. All right. Well, I wouldn't say that's a good thing, but it is what it is, right? So then, so next meeting would be October 5th. Between now and October 5th, I can talk to Josh and kind of what would be the points to discuss on for the planning board meeting on October 13th. And I can circulate ahead of time and we can feel some points need to be added. We can do that too.
I have an extra wrench to report that I'm not actually available on the 13th.
Ooh. How about the 14th? 14th or 15th, committee members. What I was thinking, let me back up. I think the idea is still we want to stay the course, talk to the planning board, so we're queued up for the report to town meeting. Could I circulate to see if the planning board and your schedule work on the 14th, 15th, just for just B1 discussion only? I'm open to other ideas if anybody has them.
Invite the planning board to discussion on the 5th.
Okay, so just don't worry about the prep, just go in and have a conversation, per se, I guess. Right?
Throwing out ideas.
That's a good idea. You guys are, the planning board is pretty flexible, fairly good, agile bunch. They'll be okay, I think. Right, Aaron?
I'm going to stick to my loss for words this evening, Rich.
All right, I think they'll be, well,
I think we can think out in front of them without much issue.
okay. All right, so
I
back,
don't know that they have a strong need for a buttoned up detailed presentation. I mean, it's in everyone's interest of time and efficiency, of course, but
I get you.
I think they would rather not have multiple meetings.
Right. Gotcha. No, point taken. All right, so I retract what I said. We'll go, so October 5th, work with everybody on the committee to meet with the planning board, provided they're available.
Yes.
Yeah, I may not be on the 5th.
Okay.
Just having out of town people coming in. That's why that's my personal thing.
Okay. Well, we could,
Well, that's right. I mean,
yeah, I understand.
if you get everybody else, you're never going to get a perfect day.
No, I understand. All right, well, I guess we'll probably have to go with you're welcome to invite your out-of-town guests to the,
That will certainly put them to sleep.
no, go local government and,
Yeah, local civics.
yeah. All right, so then we'll go with October 5th. Is 7 work, or we need 7:30, you think, on the 5th? What's the?
How long is it going to take? Should we start at noon?
No, I don't.
7 works for me.
Yeah, I think we'll probably be okay. I don't think we need to start at noon with the planning board. It gets
7 works for me.
7 work all right for you, Aaron? It's getting darker.
Yeah, on the 5th, 7 works.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, and in the meantime, I will reach out to the engineers for that meeting as well. To get some sewer related conversation to this, okay?
All right. Good night, guys.
Good
Seems
night.
like that's about it.
Hold on, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Before we jump off the phone, I don't think that we've put enough weight behind the fact that we defined direction tonight. We came to a consensus as a committee, and we have laid out something that resembles a path forward in terms of our recommendation to the planning board. So before we jump off the phone, I just want to call out the fact that in one meeting, we defined direction, we picked the scope. I think Susan and Aaron agreed on something in a public forum, and we have a really good path forward, at least from my perspective. So I don't want everybody to get off the phone with the fatigue of a long meeting. We made some great motions here tonight, and I really appreciate what everybody contributed. Thank you.
Well, I would agree. I know maybe some people aren't too happy, but I think, I don't know. I think you're right, Kevin. I agree 100%.
I think we made progress.
And this is a transparent process, by the way, because you can watch it on your local Norfolk Community TV. So a little bit.
So this meeting on the 5th is you're going to try to ask the planning board to call a special meeting?
Well, yeah, it's predicated on them being available for this special meeting on October 5th. Yes.
Well, procedurally, you're not asking the planning board to call a meeting. It would be listed as a B1 meeting with the planning board being invited. Just procedurally. I just want to make sure that's clear because you have to put it in the, you have to post it. We do this all the time with the advisory. It's an advisory meeting, but B1 is coming to present. So you want to call it a B1 meeting, but you are having the planning board come to listen, meaning the entire planning board doesn't have to show up. They can send just one representative.
Yeah,
I just want to make that clear because you have to be very specific in the way that you list town government meetings. So you want to make sure that you're saying it's a B1 meeting that you're inviting the planning board to.
Well, Susan, just to clarify, I was intending to, it's a B1 meeting, but I intended to post it for the entire planning board to be able to actively participate in the discussion. We may not get all of them, but
no. I understand that you're asking for all of them to come, but you can't have a joint meeting between planning board and B1. It has to be listed as someone's meeting. And since we are asking them to meet on not their regular night, we're not coming to their meeting. It is now a B1 meeting that the planning board is invited to attend, strongly encouraged to attend, however it's worded, versus where they are technically absent if they are not there for their own meetings. Here, it would just be they decline the invitation for whatever reason.
Sure. Yep. Point taken.
Sorry, it's just a little procedural thing that we have to get right, because if you don't and it's not listed correctly, people will be upset.
Yep. Point taken. All right. Well, I think we probably covered what we can for this evening, although there is public comment on the agenda. So is that, I think we've lost the public at this point.
Yeah, I think we lost the public a while ago.
Okay. Ed's point of clarification, it's on there now, Ed, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so the TBD is October 5th. B1.
Okay.
All right. Well,
So obviously the faster you can confirm that, obviously it's better for everybody.
correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Glass half full, right, Kevin?
Yeah.
Good job, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Night.